Welcome back to Man vs. Meeple, the show where we talk about all things board game related. Today we have a Kickstarter preview for Gearworks. This one is from PieceKeeper Games. It's got an interesting sort of very puzzly gameplay where you're kind of Sudokuing these cards out, these gear cards out there, and sort of area controlling the board.
That's right. So let's talk about the components within the game first. Each player will have a set of gear cards at the start of the game, 5 dealt to each player within the game. There's a stack of gear cards. These gear cards are all represented by a number, numbered 1 through 9, and then a specific type of gear. There's 5 types of gears in the game. So there's 45 cards basically within the game. Now, you also have gears, and this is a board. We don't actually have a physical board. Now, we're hearing that there may be either a physical cardboard board or a mat that's going to be an add-on within the game. However, you can play the game without one.
Yeah.
And that's represented by a 4x5 grid that are these gears. So where these intersect, that is a card, and then a card, and so forth.
Yeah.
So there's places for cards to go within the game. Each of these rows and columns are either numbered 1 through 4 or alphabetical A through E. And they also have a very specific type of part that is associated to them. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to control rows and columns with your caller in order to get these specific parts at the end of the game. Now, it's played over 3 rounds, so there's 3 parts that players can collect of specific types.
Right, you're going to be scoring a lot of points. I mean, you're going to get points for those parts even if you don't use them, but there's also contraption cards that you can use these parts on. Everyone's going to get one of those at the beginning of the game. You can basically fulfill these at any time during the game by flipping them over at the end of the round, putting parts on them that you've acquired that round, and it's basically going to give you bonus points for those parts basically by marrying them up with a contraption.
You also have sparks. Players will acquire sparks by placing their gears into certain sequences into this grid. These sparks will allow you to draw cards, to manipulate the game, to play cards over top of other cards through the course of the game, even to draw new contraptions into your hand so you're getting the right mix of parts with contraptions to score at the end of each round.
Yeah, I don't think it's a coincidence that he chose sparks for these because they, I think he said, they power a lot of the game. Because you're going to be able to, like Jeremy said, draw cards, break some of the game rules with those things.
So to start the game, you will have all of the gears face down with either their number or their letter face up, and you're going to seed the board with 2 random gears on the top left corner and then 2 random gears on the bottom right corner. Now, we've kind of have a game in progress here so we can show you guys how the game actually plays.
Yeah, the way the game plays is very simple. There's some math involved, but the gameplay itself is quite simple. On your turn, you're going to do one of 2 things. You're going to either play a card into the grid, or you're going to pass. Now, during your turn, you can collect sparks, you can spend sparks, and those, most of them are anytime actions. Because you're going to spend sparks, like Jeremy said, to get a card. You can spend sparks to sort of break some of the rules as you play a card. But let's start with the basic standard playing of a card. When you play a card, there are basically some guidelines that you have to follow. The first, well, the easiest rather, is in any given column, so the A through E, you can't have any more than 1 color of a gear. So right now in column B, we have a blue and a brown, so no one can play a blue and a brown in column B at this point. The other rule is when you play in a row, they go in sequential order. And again, at the beginning of the game, there's only going to be 1 card in some of the rows. So when you play, you're going to be able to actually dictate which direction that ascending order goes. Right now, there's a 1 right here, there's an 8 right here. I could play a 7 right here. Now, this is the interesting thing. You can play any card here, but if I play a 7, something interesting happens. You're able to collect a spark at the end of your play if the math involved with cards that are closest to the card you played. So I played this 7. I look at all the cards that are closest to it orthogonally. If I can make an addition or subtraction with 2 of those cards, 1 in the vertical column and 1 in the horizontal row, that equal 7, I'm going to get a bonus spark. Again, you can use those sparks for a lot of things. So I play this 7. I look here. I've got an 8 and a 1. So 8 minus 1 is 7. That gets me a bonus spark. Now, they've even put little arrows on these cards so that you can kind of help yourself remember which way they go. So they suggest that when you play that, I'd turn this 1. Not that it's necessary for gameplay, but now the arrows are all flowing in one direction, so you can easily remember that this has to go in ascending order left to right.
So why is that super important? The reason why is, as you see in this example, only a 7 or higher can be played in this row afterwards because it's going upwards in the numerical order. Now, if this 7 was happened to be played over here, which is possible because there's 3 different types of gears, then you could play a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 in any of these columns that are left. So there's where the math comes in, there's where the strategy comes in. And you can see by playing cards at the very beginning of the round on the very first few turns, you can lock people out of rows by playing a 1 on one end and then a 1 on the other end.
Yeah, you can make it
only ones can be played for the rest of the round.
You can make it very difficult. This isn't as difficult as the example Jeremy just gave, but if I played the 7 here, we've got 3 more columns here that have to be a 7, 8, or a 9.
Yeah.
And in fact, if I played a 9 next, then you'd have to play 9s. So you can make those very difficult, which brings me to the other thing you can do on your turn, which is pass. And oftentimes this is going to happen when you literally can't play a card. And you can often play a card. You might not always get a spark, but there are going to be times where you literally can't play as a card because the math isn't working. And that's where that Sudoku vibe comes in, for me anyway.
Yeah.
So once you've done that, either one of those things, like I said, you can spend sparks to do things during your turn, and you can gain sparks in one of 2 ways. Either with the math, you get a bonus spark, or at any time, you can discard 2 cards out of your hand to the bottom of the deck to take a spark as well.
Let's talk about the actual sparks and why it's important to have them. On your turn, if you're locked out of being able to do something, you can spend a spark to draw a card, which opens up your possibilities to the game. Also, you can spend 2 sparks. This is very important too because it allows you the opportunity to lay over the top of other cards. So if I spent 2 sparks, I could say, well, you know, this row is going to be impossible for me. Maybe everyone's already passed. I could play this 4 here. The reason why is because there's not a gold gear here, and it's sequentially the next one up. But that costs me 2 sparks to be able to do that.
Right.
And it may not earn you a spark because the math doesn't make sense. Remember, you don't have to have the math right.
No.
You can still play a card. You get a spark, though, from doing the right type of math in those locations.
Yeah, that math, it may sound difficult. We're probably not doing the greatest job of explaining it, but the math is very simple.
Absolutely.
And it's what you use to get basically a bonus spark at the end of the round. So it's not necessary, but I will say most of the players at our table really wanted to make that happen for sure.
So why are you doing this? What's the whole purpose of this? When you place a card, the next thing you do is you look at the row and you look at the column in which you place. Let's go back to David's example. He placed this 7 here. He looks at his player color, which is white, and he will turn over both the row and the column and point these white directions to that card. The reason for that is at the end of the round, when every single player is passed and can't do any more things, you're going to look at each of these rows and figure out who has area control in those areas. The person that has area control in each specific row and each specific row and column is going to get the part associated with that area. So if the game ended or the round ended at this point, David would get a glove and he would get one of these fires.
Right.
And he would place them on his turn. Then what happens at the end of the round is that each player is allowed to expend those parts to build contraptions that they have in their hand. Now, every player will have a contraption at the start of every round. However, they also have the ability to spend 2 sparks to get a secondary or a third contraption in their hand, giving them more options to spin. On the bottom of these contraption cards, you have 2 possibilities that they can spend. If they have the right parts, they can spend either 1 or both. If they spend 1, it's 4 points at the end of the game. If they spend both, it's 9 points. You get get an additional point, basically. If you don't spend any of your parts because you can't fulfill these contraptions, guess what? Those parts are not necessarily gone out of the game. They're just put over to the side for you, and they're worth 2 points each at the end of the game, but they can't be used on the next round's contraptions.
Exactly. You lose the opportunity to use them on the contraptions, but the good news is they're worth 2 points each at the end of the game.
Yep. So at the end of the round, all these cards are going to flush. You're going to reshuffle this deck. People will keep any gear cards they have left in their hand.
Yep.
You have a maximum of 8 gear cards you can have at any given time. You have a maximum of 5 sparks. You're going to reseed the board with 2 gears up here, 2 gears down there, and then you're going to start another round by each player drawing 5 cards. And you're going to do that 3 times until the end of the game, and then you're going to add up all the points to see who wins.
Yeah, the game has some interesting aspects as you're playing cards, because in Jeremy's example, you see if the end rounded here, I had control of this column and row. But as the game plays on, this changes all the time.
Yeah.
So you can have a strategy where you could wait back one thing that we didn't talk about was when you pass, you're out of the round. However, you can spend 1 spark to jump back into the round.
Yeah.
The round will only end when all players at the table consecutively pass.
Yep.
So if you're able to hang out for a little while and then come in towards the end of the round, you're able to basically seize control of some of those spots that people thought they had wrapped up.
Right. Again, you get victory points for any of the contraptions that you fulfilled, either 4 or 9 points per. You get 2 victory points for every single part that you have that you weren't able to put on a contraption. And then you get 1 single point for every spark that you have left in your tableau. And that's the game. It's a very interesting game.
Yeah,
and
it's very thinky for such
absolutely.
What feels like a very light game. Very thinky. The math comes into play, and not only the math, but then trying to follow those sequential orders and the color rule really makes you feel like you're solving a puzzle almost every turn.
Yeah, and as you said, it changes every single round. One round may be completely different simply by the placement of the 2 original cards and what the people place in the first round, because it can make placement very difficult for players.
Yeah, it's a really cool game. The play mat, which we don't have here, is something you should check out. I believe he said that that was going to potentially be an add-on. He wasn't sure whether it was going to be a play mat or a board at this point, but he's going to do something like that, so check that out on the Kickstarter. It would help a lot, but like Jeremy said earlier, you can play the game right out of the box as we did.
Yep. 2 to 4 players, 45 minutes, ages 10 and up. Gearworks. If you guys are interested, go back it. If you have questions about the game, make them in the comments. David and I will answer them for you. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, everything else that we do here at Man vs. Meeple, and we will catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.
Season 2 of Man vs. Meeple is sponsored in part by Cool Stuff Inc. Cool stuff in stock at coolstuffinc.com.